Hi students, for chapter 10 we'll be talking about emotional development. Now, the word emotion is something that you're probably very familiar with. We have names for different emotions like fear and surprise and happiness and sadness. And of course, we'll be talking about some of the emergence of those emotions. But emotional development involves more than just acquiring new emotions. It also involves developing emotional competence. We become capable of new and also more complex emotions, but then also our relationships with others change. We understand others more. We understand what emotions they may be experiencing, what their displays of emotion mean. We also learn to recognize our own emotions, to regulate our emotions, and manage our emotions over time. So much of this developmental change happens in infancy and childhood, but we do see some emotional development changes across the lifespan. So beginning with infants' emotional experience. When infants are born at birth, they are able to show some very basic emotions. They can show interest in something, like interest in a toy or in a picture that goes across their field of vision. They may experience distress, especially if they are uncomfortable. They may show disgust. So if you put a particular flavor in a baby's mouth, especially one that is very bitter, they will scrunch up their nose and show that very particular disgust face in response to a flavor that they don't like. Interestingly, about disgust, it really does begin as this response to something that doesn't taste good, but with age, our disgust can transform. We still get disgusted by certain flavors, but there's also this level of psychological disgust, like when someone does something that kind of disturbs you in a way that you're really uncomfortable with, and you can also use that same face to express disgust in their actions. Uh, think about not just disturbing behavior, but kind of gross behavior. Like if you see someone use the restroom and then walk out the door without washing their hands, and you can kind of go, ew, and scrunch up your nose, much in the same way that a baby scrunches up his nose when he tastes a flavor that he doesn't like. Now, between 2 and 7 months, infants begin to show some additional expressions of emotions. They begin to show anger, and anger is a response that we have when our path is blocked. So frustration and anger are very close, and we can have anger with the source of our frustration. Sadness, joy, surprise, and also fear. And these emotions, they appear so early in life, and they're so consistent across cultures, the expressions that each emotion represents, uh, that they must be biologically determined. Now, again, these tend to emerge in all infants at about the same age. They're seen and interpreted similarly across all cultures. So when you see a look of disgust or a look of surprise, it's generally the same across the world, no matter what culture it is. Even infants who are born blind and have never seen facial expressions before, they will display some of the same facial expressions. So we know it's not just modeling, we know that this is biologically pre-programmed. Now, infants originally or first start smiling as a reflexive response to a change in their arousal state. So something changes and they kind of reflexively smile because of that change. And between 6 and 10 weeks of age, they start to show a social smile. And this is a smile that's in response to familiar people. So younger than that, you'll smile at a baby and they won't necessarily smile back. And then there's this big change that parents and family notice at that age, where if you know look down and smile at a baby, they smile back, and then you start to see even more enriching and emotional interactions amongst family members with their babies. So those were the basic, and they're also called primary emotions. The next level of emotions that children develop are what's called self-conscious emotions. These emotions don't develop until a child develops self-consciousness, self-awareness, the awareness that they are separate from other people, that they observe themselves and their own behavior and then judge them by what they think is appropriate rules and standards that they've learned from their outside environment. They compare their behavior with those standards. And if they match or don't match their behavior with those standards, then it can affect the way that they feel. So, for example, if you're not supposed to, steal a cookie, and you know that that's bad, and then you learn that your mom is angry with you because you stole a cookie, then may experience shame or guilt for doing something bad. So what this takes is for you to understand that you are separate from other people, that there are rules and standards, like you're not supposed to steal, that you are supposed to live by, and that you've broken that standard, and then it can lead to a negative feeling. Also, embarrassment is a slightly different one, but kind of along the same lines. There are standards for your behavior. For example, you should not be walking around with toilet paper on your shoe. And if you happen to step out of the bathroom, have toilet paper on your shoe, and notice it, you'll end up with this mild embarrassment that you have done something that isn't up to a standard of behavior. Pride is a positive emotion that children feel when they've actually met some type of standard, and so they feel good about themselves. And then empathy requires you identifying or feeling what someone else is feeling. And of course, this requires you to understand that you are separate from other people. So again, this self-consciousness, being aware of oneself, emerges around 15 to 18 months of age. And we'll actually come back to this and talk about it in the next chapter, because there are ways that we can test to see if children understand that the person in the mirror is themselves, and that they start to develop this own story about their lives and about what they're experiencing. This is when we see the further development of emotions. And then also the very earliest memories start to form a little bit after this, when we have not just the development of self-conscious emotions, but also the development of language, which facilitates the creation of those new memories. Emotion regulation also emerges with age, and this is one's ability to control their own emotions. And infants have some very basic methods or strategies that are used to try to control one's emotions and not to display all of the sadness or frustration that they're actually feeling. So when infants get kind of overwhelmed and have some strong emotions, they may suck vigorously on objects like thumb sucking. They may turn their bodies away from any distressing stimuli. They'll smile, they'll avert their gaze, and then they'll show fussiness to try to get out of whatever situation is making them feel uncomfortable. So, with this very early emotion regulation, parents are often the ones who are first facilitating this and helping to control babies' emotions. Parents will do things like, hold the baby and, bounce them on their knee or pat their back. And then infants eventually start to regulate it on their own, like sucking their thumb and turning away from something that is uncomfortable. And then in toddlerhood, you see even greater or more complex attempts to regulate one's own emotions, engaging in self-soothing behaviors, distracting, like instead of looking at one thing, look at something else and entertain and fill your mind with something else other than that which is distracting, and more active attempts to change the situation. Now, emotion regulation develops in relation to an increasing ability to use language. And in childhood, we see that kids will start to talk to themselves to calm themselves down. And eventually that talking to themselves becomes an internal monologue that we do, even still in adulthood, when you're telling yourself in your mind, calm down, it's going to be okay, relax. This is also emotional regulation in adulthood. Parents use many techniques to help their infants learn to manage their emotions. So whether it be direct intervention in changing the situation or trying to change their behaviors, modeling for how to calm themselves down or how to express their emotions appropriately, selective reinforcement. This could be responding positively when they are calming themselves down, or then when they respond calmly to a difficult situation, and then not reinforcing that behavior if they have a tantrum. So we ignore tantrums when their emotions are out of control. Verbal instruction, like, okay, breathe, calm down, right? And also touch, giving hugs, giving that comfort. Uh, Parents will respond to infants and children's emotions, with that comfort. But eventually, what we want to see is that infants and toddlers are able to control their emotions on their own. Now, unfortunately, some caregivers may interpret emotional displays as attempts at manipulation of the parent, of trying to get something. So they're crying in order to manipulate the parent, and they're not actually crying because they're upset. It's not a valid expression of their feeling. And this is unfortunate because babies aren't necessarily faking it. And so they really truly are upset, and so this may result in insensitive responses to children's emotional displays and can even interfere with emotional development. And this can become, a more serious problem if it continues, where parents disregard a child's emotions and don't offer them kind of descriptions of their emotions, or help them through soothing emotions during difficult times. And these children have a more difficult time emoting their emotions, sometimes even into adulthood. Parental stress, depression, and conflict can be some maladaptive social contexts that will influence emotional development in infancy. So, for example, mothers who are depressed tend to be less responsive to babies, and they show less affection. They use more negative forms of touch, and they show more negative emotions and behaviors. And perhaps because of this, infants of depressed mothers show a variety of negative outcomes and slightly more inhibited emotional development. Now, face-to-face play is an important way for infants to learn to manage their own emotions. So this interactive play is one that involves mothers, getting, kind of close to their babies' faces, and um, making sounds and acting surprised, and getting their babies all excited. And during this time, mothers are displaying such emotions like joy and surprise, like, oh, look at the dolly, oh my goodness. And so with those displays of emotion, children will learn to manage their emotions and are more likely to display the same positive emotions that parents model for them, and are less likely to display negative emotions that parents are not modeling for them and also are not reinforcing in that way. Now, interactive play can turn into more active play that corresponds with children's developing motor skills. So crawling and walking, when kids learn to do this, they learn to get around. It does add some challenges to the parent-infant interaction, that kids can get kind of distracted and want to go explore their environment and aren't, right there in the parent's lap and interacting with the parent. And also, these development of motor skills, like getting around, can mean that the baby is more likely to be exposed to hazards, and also kind of drifting away from the parent and perhaps putting themselves in danger.